All right, so we got another one here from Fandom Pulse. I tell you, this site is just a goldmine of information on Dungeons and Dragons and how it's becoming more and more woke as the days pass. It's just seems like this is going to be their hill that they die on of being DI in Dungeons and Dragons. The title of this article is New Dungeons and Dragons Supplement Delivers Rant on Anti-Colonial Play, asking players to avoid narrow morality against monsters races like gnolls. Well, you see, storytelling is usually about good and evil. There's subtle shades of gray in between is not typically what we want to see in our heroes. We do like that a little bit, and from time to time it's good to see a villain who is very much in the gray, but typically we want to see good versus evil. Let's get into this article here. Dungeons & Dragons has moved into woke territory to the detriment of players in 2024's new edition, and now a new supplement, Forge of Foes by Sky Flourish, turns an adventure into an anti-colonialism rant to further push woke politics on players. It's been a rough year for D&D players, watching their beloved role-playing game of questing, fighting monsters, turning into a political cudgel and social conditioning tool by the Hasbro Corporation. If you're a D&D player, I say this all the time, don't play D&D. It is not a good game. It might take you a while to get over the illusion in your mind that D&D is great, because there's so many games out there that are so much better than D&D. I can't even begin to describe to you how bad D&D is by comparison to other games. Just go play other games. There's thousands of them out there. You can play something better. The 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide infamously has incorporated BDSM fetish community practices in the game for safe spaces, having players make an X with their arms if they feel triggered by a situation and requiring a DM to stop the game and address the player in question. I don't know. That's a BDSM thing. I don't know. I'm not into BDSM, so I don't know if that is the case. The 2024 Player's Handbook is filled with imagery of BIPOC and female characters at a margin of more than 5-1 for white male characters, about the direct opposite of the demographics who play the game. Now, we talked about this in a previous video I did just a few days ago. That's not true. This is inaccurate. I counted them. You can go onto AnyFlip and find the Player's Handbook and count the images of white men, white human men, and non-white human men and human females in the book. And it's 55 for the non-whites and non-males and 35 for the white men, which is not a 5-1 discrepancy. That's ridiculous. If you go through and you count all of the non-human races in the game, you're going to find a bunch of them that look like white men. You're going to find some that look like white women, some that look like non-white. And I mean, they're non-human colors. They're purple and pink and blue and all these different colors that humans are not. So that's not really something that I factored into the count. If you want to go through and count things and be like, oh, well, look, there's all these non-humans in here, so that counts. That's against white males. Well, it's D&D. They have all sorts of non-human. Here, we're looking at these orcs right here. One D&D race also has had its entire history removed to get rid of slavery, and then there's the constant push to humanize orcs. One image even portrays the orcs as a family of Mexicans, making for a completely insulting depiction of Latinos in the name of diversity, right? So they're trying to humanize orcs, and what they do in this case is they make them look like Hispanic people from Latin America. The thing is, orcs are evil. Orcs have always been evil, and if you want to play goodly orcs, you can do that. There's a couple of games I can tell you about right now. So I keep saying play different games. Shadowrun. Shadowrun is a great game. Oh man, it is so good. I don't know about newer editions, but previous editions were really good. And we can take a look at this right here. What is this, Sovereign Stone? So we see here on the cover, we got an elf here, a dwarf, a human, and this over here is an orc, clearly from Africa, even though Africa doesn't exist in this world. Let's see if we can zoom in on that. This is an orcat. This is an elfat. They're female. But this is an orc female right here. She's helping out the humans, the dwarves. They work together. This right here is also from Sovereign Stone. This is the orcs description. They spelled the orcs correctly, by the way, with a K. That's how you're supposed to spell it. So you can see that they are dressed in a civilized manner. They're not wearing rags and tattered armor that they've taken from other people. And they also look inquisitive. This down here, this little guy is a Pickway. In Sovereign Stone, you're not allowed to play a Pickway. I don't know why. I think you were later on, but in the original book, they didn't have Pickways as a playable character. And here we see on the cover, this is the Die 20 system. D&D pushed this Die 20 system. Die 20 system is good, but they're like sitting there thinking that they invented it. They didn't invent it. They were the first game, of course, to use a 20-sided die, but they didn't invent the Die 20 system. That was Talislanta in the 1980s. So go play Talislanta. Another great game. Get the 3rd edition of Talislanta. You can download it for free at talislanta.com. all of their books, except for this newest one that's coming out, 6th edition, which is also DEI woke garbage, from what I can see, are free. So go play Talos-Lanta, good game. I'm giving you all sorts of ideas here where you can play different games that don't even involve orcs, like Talos-Lanta. Okay, so Dungeons & Dragons came under further scrutiny after it was revealed senior designer Jason Tondro penned a foreword to a history book on Dungeons & Dragons calling Gary Gygax misogynistic and accusing him of cultural appropriation. Oh, cultural appropriation, that's just the worst thing ever. Okay, if you want to get into cultural appropriation, then you don't have a leg to stand on, because there are so many people out there appropriating white culture, whiteness, white things, that you got nothing to say. This prompted Elon Musk to beg the question as to how much Hasbro costs for him to buy the parent company of Wizards of the Coast and save Dungeons & Dragons from all of these woke controversies. No, kill Dungeons & Dragons. Seriously, guys, stop playing D&D. Go play better games. So this is the cover of the book here, Forge of Foes. I think that's an orc on the cover. I can't tell for sure. Each artist I've seen depicts orcs in a different manner, it seems like. Now a licensed supplement has been released called Forge of Foes in the Lazy DM series from Sky Flourish, has turned into an anti-white rant about colonialism to destroy players' immersion in the game. Former World of Warcraft lead developer Mark Kern Grooms posted on X about the supplement saying, "Do you like lectures in your D&D supplements? Forge of Foes, a 5e book by Sly Flourish." He says Sly Flourish here. It says Sky Flourish up here. I don't know which one is correct. Okay, includes lengthy section on anti-colonialism that it says is the greatest evil DMs must learn to deal with, and that dealing with it will make the game better. Tips include not all gnolls. Say gnoll bandits are attacking, not gnolls are attacking. Focus on villainy as a choice, not a trait. Guess we can't have evil monsters anymore. It was just their socioeconomic circumstances. No heroes, your players aren't saving anyone. That would make them seem weak. Use reliable sources for cultural inspirations and try to see things from the Mind Flayer's perspective, apparently. Mind Flayers are truly evil. Why is tabletop absolutely infused with these useless and insulting sermons that don't belong in rulebooks? Because there are players who want that. Because there are creators who want that. For the last group I played in, I mentioned that orcs are probably bad bakers. Oh, the GM, he was offended. How dare you accuse orcs? That's racism. He even said that was racism. Like, orcs are considered brutish and dim-witted. Why would they be good at baking? Baking requires patience and a desire to do something precisely, whereas orcs seem like they bash something and then ask questions later if they ask questions at all. Here we go. What is this down here? Can't read that. I think they have a zoom in of this later on. Yeah, down there. Okay. With his tweet, he posted a screenshot of a D&D group scroll for initiative from Blue Sky that states, "This supplement has anti-colonial play," and called for Hasbro's official 2025 Monster Manual to also address the points. This post included a section from the supplement which said, "Use ancestries as adjectives. Gnoll bandits are attacking villages rather than gnolls are attacking villages." There is no difference there. You say gnolls are, you don't know why they're attacking the villages. Are the villages of evil people? If they're going to say, oh, nobody's evil, nobody's good, it's just you're all living in the gray. Some people are good, some people are evil. They're actually starting in the gray and they just move that way. Are the gnoll bandits, the gnolls attacking evil villages? Then, okay, the gnolls are attacking evil villagers. You don't get this. They don't understand that they're being stupid. It also stated, focus on villainy as a choice, not a biological or cultural imperative. So what does it say here? Scroll for Initiative says, Forge of Foes is a great book, and I particularly like the section on anti-colonial play, which is written very thoughtfully and carefully. But it would be awesome if the 2025 Monster Manual addressed the first point. And it says, it said the same, we already read this. Focus on villainy as a choice. All right. Finally, Grooms posted a full page telling players how to engage in anti-colonial play, which includes those points and more as checklists for players on how to act more woke in the D&D setting. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at it, if we can. Title of this page is Anti-Colonial Play. In any family tree, tracing out the evolution of modern fantasy role-playing games, the source of that hierarchy isn't a role-playing game at all. Tabletop miniatures wargaming was the forebear of fantasy role-playing in its earliest forms. In fact, the primal edition of the Dungeons & Dragons game made the explicit assumption that new players were already wargamers and would automatically understand the lexicon and context of those games. some 50 years later, D&D and other 5e fantasy games would be all but unrecognizable to the players of the game in its first wargame adjacent incarnation. But despite that, the DNA of all editions that led to 5e still lingers in the game's rules and its worldview. And the worldview holds a starkly colonialist view of the relationships between the game's heroes and too many of the other sapient peoples, humanoids, and other creatures with intelligence, awareness, language, and culture, who often play the part of the game's foes. The ongoing legacy of colonialism is the foundation of a great deal of what's wrong with the world. And a book like this is clearly not the venue to try to fix what's wrong with the world. However, as gamers, we can, should, and must think about how our experience of the real world feeds into the worlds we create together. We need to understand the ways in which the traditions of colonialism, hardwired into common culture and media, can easily make us embrace potentially hurtful ideas even without meaning to. A problem worth fixing. The topic of colonialism in fantasy gaming deserves far more discussion that any one section of a monsters book can bring to bear. The sidebars in this section dig in just a little bit to the starting points of colonialist thought and its pervasiveness in the real world. But even those brief discussions aren't the real point of us wanting to talk about decolonizing monsters in Forge of Foes. You're right, it's not, because you want to just decolonize the whole world and say white people cause all the problems in the world and white people are evil. That's what you're trying to do. We want to have this discussion because being aware of and rejecting colonialist ideas in our fantasy role-playing games makes those games better. Because the more interesting you make the peoples and sapient creatures of your world and their place in that world, the more interesting your story. And because in the end, building better stories with the help of a new perspective doesn't take any more effort than building the same old stories that fantasy gaming has been working with for the past 50 years. I like how they tried to explain away their racism and anti-white DEI garbage. A checklist for better stories. The point of this section isn't to figure out how to fix colonialist thinking in the real world, as much as we all like to. It's about acknowledging how the harmful roots of this worldview, talked about in the colonialism, the short version sidebar, have long been a part of fantasy role-playing, and the ongoing problems created by a pervasive, it's just a game, moral setup in RPGs, talked about in the othering sidebar below. Those deep historical faults at the heart of the games we love make for tired derivative storytelling, but by keeping a handful of course corrections in mind, we can move away from those old faults as we build better game worlds. Avoid monolithic ancestry cultures. All elves, dwarves, orcs are the same, in favor of a broader cultural worldview. Use ancestries as adjectives. Gnoll bandits are attacking villages rather than gnolls are attacking villages. To avoid forcing narrow morality onto sapient creatures. Focus on villainy as a choice, not a biological or cultural imperative. Avoid the trap of perceiving civilization from a single viewpoint, usually settled lands equals civilized lands, so that everywhere else is uncivilized. Wow, they're really reaching with that one. Understand and move away from the trope of heroic characters as the savior of lesser folk. Well, you know what? I want to play just an average, everyday Joe when I'm playing my games. That's what I want to do. I don't want to be anything special in any way. I just want to be like, how I am right now. I want to play myself in every game. How about that? I just want to play myself. I don't play these games to escape reality. No. Make use of cultural inspirations from reliable sources with the aim of centering other cultures and perspectives from a position of respect. No, don't do that. Don't ever do that. Always disrespect other cultures. It's better that way, actually. It's more fun. They're complaining here that, it's not interesting enough. Well, throw some disrespect at other cultures, especially in a make-believe world. The sections that follow explore this checklist in greater detail. Ultimately, none of the thoughts and suggestions presented here are anything like a complete fix for a harmful colonialist legacy of fantasy role-playing. It goes on to the next page, I'm assuming, because it just starts a new sentence right there. Or, that's only a sentence fragment. And then it has the colonialism short version here. I guess this is the sidebar. So what is colonialism? Colonialism is a topic far too broad to be properly summed up in this or any other short treatise, but in a nutshell, the history of our modern age has been defined by specific groups of people laying claim to the entire world over centuries of exploration. You can tell the people who wrote this live in North America and have only ever lived in North America and probably never visited anywhere else outside of the Western world. And not caring that the rest of the world had other people living in it at the time. The history of colonialism is a history of conflict and warfare, of groups clashing over control of wealth and natural resources, of one group of people raiding into and claiming lands not their own, and treating the lives and livelihoods of folks living in those lands as plunder. And if any of the above sounds vaguely similar to any fantasy RPG you've ever played, you might get the sense of the problem. There's no problem. What are you talking about? This is human behavior. This is so typical for sentient, or as they call them, sapient creatures. Okay, what's going to be the conflict in your game? Well, the orcs are just over there minding their own business. The gnolls are over there minding their own business. The elves are over there. The dwarves are over there. Everybody's just minding their own business. Oh, well, what are we going to do? I don't know. Let's go try to find some treasure in those ruins over there. Oh, those are plundered centuries ago. Oh, well, I don't know what to do then. Ridiculous. At its heart, every fantasy role-playing game tells a story. Our stories take place in specific worlds and often explore a lot of the negative aspects of those worlds in the course of showing off the best parts of those worlds. All heroes need evil to fight against, after all, but colonialism needs to be treated differently than many of the other negative aspects of our game narratives, because the harm of unexamined colonialism can hurt players and the people near them in very real ways. For many of us, the story of the game takes place entirely in our imaginations, both the good and the bad, but for just as many players, the bad aspects of a game narrative are made real in their own experiences every day of their lives. For many of us, the stories of heroism and adventure we know best are stories of colonialism, and being aware of how colonialism in a game can harm others who play the game is the first step in addressing that harm. Yeah, I say make your games more colonialist. That's all I can say. All right, let's see here. And it looks like we have the end of the article here. With Dungeons & Dragons already facing scrutiny because of their focus on identity politics with fantasy races that make no sense, trying to force real-world issues onto players who want to hunt monsters in an escapist fantasy setting, this is the last supplement that D&D needs for their brand. And then it goes on to, what do you think? Are there any comments on here? Oh, look, there's a couple of comments. Is this parody? Somebody asked. Codex Redux. What did he write? He wrote a longer comment. I did that back in the 80s with a game. My character adopted an orphaned mind flayer, raised him as a Baptist Christian child, and he went off to evangelize the Illithids, which are the mind flayers. He became a great saint among them. I suspect that is not what they have in mind. Like I said, I played a game where I was the only goodly orc in the whole world, as far as I knew, anyway. And that's fine. You can do those sorts of things. The second edition of Dungeons & Dragons did the Humanoids Handbook, complete book of humanoids, where they're like, hey, you play these other races. You incorporate this into your game however you want to. You could have just a one-off, or maybe there's a small group that for some reason are not evil. Or you could have the entire race be not evil. It's fine. It's up to you. Play it how you want to. They already did this. This, of course, we know is just a pushing of the agenda. This is the message. Keep it out of my game. Whatever. I mean, D&D is garbage. Like I said, play other games. I mentioned 3 of them in this video. And you should be able to download versions of all 3 of those somewhere for free. So thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.